Namaskar, welcome to Inside Tonight Ashok Vyas. And today's show is going to be very, very special because the theme that we have is related to you from every side. We'll be talking about emotions, but we'll also be talking about economy. And as you are aware, Indian government has presented its budget for the upcoming year. We'll take a quick look at the main features of the budget, but more important, it is how budget plays out in creating your experiences. It is not the budget of a nation but the budget of your own family. And does emotional experience necessarily have something to do with economics? We'll learn that from none other than Professor Sanjay Patel. Namaste, Professor Patel, welcome. And then I also have the pleasure of welcoming Sunil Vepulaji, a motivational speaker, a good friend, as well as an author. So with both of them, as we start the journey of today's understanding. Let me begin with you, Professor of Literature. How would you define emotion, Sanjay ji?
You asked a very abstract question. Psychologists, philosophers have been trying to topple that question for generations and generations. I mean, if you look at emotions, right, you could look at it from different perspective. One person would say that it is a response to the environment, okay, on a biological level. Someone will say it's a response on a psychological level. But just from a philosophical literature perspective, we would say emotion constitutes certain type of connection we feel towards situations, towards people that can help us bring us together or far apart. So it is up to us to see how these emotions actually have an impact on us, and these emotions are actually also, triggered from outside forces as well as our own forces. And as we were mentioning a little while ago, food, food has an also impact on emotions as well. As we say, comfort eating today. But overall, it is an abstract concept, and emotions have been, something that people have been trying to understand for generations, such as what is love. One of the greatest definitions of love. I'm sorry, one of the, the biggest, blockage people have had is trying to understand what is the greater meaning of love. Today, people understand love, as Shakespeare said, from Romeo and Juliet, has become more infatuation, biological, than rather than being psychological. So if you look at emotions, emotions is really, in the actual sense, it's a psychological response that we feel, which can be triggered from society or towards one another.
So psychological response is one way of putting emotions. Sunil ji, I somehow feel that many times emotions also become a source of deriving meaning. Because many times many of us coming from India feel that family is the determining factor in terms of who we are, and emotions create our experiences. So let me say this, as we'll also be talking about economics, that emotions are like currency, and like a coin has two sides. Emotions could help you soar high, as well as emotions can pull you down. So how do you see, Sunil ji, the secret of working with your emotions in the most beneficial or profitable manner?
Oh, you packed in a lot of concepts right there. But anytime I am grappling with topics like these, I get down to the basics to even examine my own assumptions of these topics. The word emotion comes from the Latin word to emotere, which is to move. In fact, the word motivation or locomotion are the same root words, which is to move. Locomotion is to move, motivation is to get something to be moved by us. So the root word is emotions are those fundamental drivers that move us. So that's a given working definition as far as I'm concerned. When it comes to driving a person's behavior, we are all people of emotions. Man is a rational animal, said Aristotle, but it's hardly true unless you are a cold blooded, psychotic murderer or somebody like that. You are never fully rational. you are driven by impulses and emotions that keep changing. In fact, if you look at the impact of the planets and the forces around you, they affect your moods, they affect your behavior, they affect the way you feel at any given point of time. But to work in a structure, to work in a society which is a relational a set of equations between people, there is a need for people to work together, which means you're saddling multiple people with multiple operating systems and multiple emotional behaviors to be working together, which is becoming a little complex because the moment you talk about a family, which is the most fundamental unit of society, versus to Vasudeva Kutumbam, which is like we are all the world, the whole world is a universal family. On that entire spectrum between a personal family and a universal family, you're expected to navigate using your emotions. In fact, if you studied the world of business, I'll share two concepts and I'll pause for further reactions. The first concept is any emotion, when you take it to its logical extreme, out of balance, then you cause distress. But any emotion, if you take it to a healthy point, it's called stress. So you need that element of stress to stretch you. Between eustress and distress is the ability for emotions to go. So let's say the energy of passion. If you take the whole positive passion, it can end up in positive endeavors. But if you pull it to the other extreme, you become an obsession. Same thing with anger. There are ways in which anger could work towards a positive thing. But if you take anger to an extreme, it can cause division, which is why the last 25 years, the business world has been talking about emotional intelligence being of far more importance than IQ, which is intellectual quotient. So I'll pause here and see if we have enough
I
to.
think you have given so much to think, and I I think when I heard that expression, your words are music to my ears. It sometimes also means that you start listening and you are impressed, but you stop following what is being said. So that's a very interesting state, which which is where I was finding myself. I was slightly drifting, but I wanted to focus on what you were saying and focus on emotions. uh, Now let me bring another dimension for both of you to kind of share your insight. If we look at emotions in a tangible or palpable way and consider it like a flow of a river, and that flow of river has its origin in your heart or your mind or whosoever the individual is. So there are various colors and shades of emotions that a human being is generating. Some of them are related to material objects. So I love this car, or I love XY type of phone, etc., etc. But there is another emotion which is related to this person, my wife, my husband, my son, my daughter, my friend, etc. Now, do you see there is a difference in these two types of emotions? Because that ultimately is resulting into whether we are entering into a consumer driven society or a society where soul has a place. And for me, emotions are more oriented towards your being soulful and being able to appreciate how others are feeling, etc. uh, because here the economics will will also come into play. So Sanjay ji, emotions for material objects or for human beings?
This is a very good point. If you look at it from a perspective where we see happiness based on objects versus happiness based on emotions, right? We are in a capitalist society that we are living in today with Amazon, right? Everything you can purchase online at your fingertips on your cell phone. This type of where you just mentioned the love of an object, of a car, of clothing. This love or this emotional love can be really an infatuation because it's based on a material object. It doesn't really go down to the root of the, as you were mentioning, the soul. This is where the emotional state, in order for it to be developed, we have to nurture relationships through, as human beings, we're social creatures. And social creatures, for them to develop any kind of emotions, it has to be through other relationships. Particularly, any child, it starts with the family, right? For young babies, as we know, when the young baby is born, if it does not receive the cuddling from the mother, with the baby understands cuddling as being love because it's too young to understand the idea of the verbal or any other forms of love. So if it doesn't receive the cuddling from a mother, that kind of love or emotions, the baby's immune system could weaken and it could, possibly have other kind of damages. So we're looking at, in capitalist society, our emotions have become based on objects. As we said, consumerism has taken actually the new shape of love, rather than understanding that family is the foundation to nurture. It's a gymnasium in order to nurture these qualities and to build and develop our, humanity as well through, the concept of love as well, which we can talk about at another time, or we can talk about it today as well.
So we are touching a very important space, Sunil ji, and let me request you to weigh on the overlap space, because if you bring, let us say, latest iPhone for your son, and he says, I love you, and that love is coming from the object that you have brought for him or for her, if it is a daughter that we are talking about. The same way, many times, the kind of gift you get, let's say necklace or a sari, I mean, that is an expression of emotions, but it is directly related to how much you can you can afford. So many times your emotions get stifled, because you expect that you want to do this thing which demands money. No, talk to, and this creates a lot of conflicts in our world, where
Oh
people
yeah.
feel frustrated and all. So let's hear
Yeah.
from you.
No, I come from the advertising world. I spent a fair amount of time in the world of advertising, and the world of advertising revolves on the principle of reciprocity, meaning if you love me, do this for me. I
Yes.
mean, you cannot. Valentine's Day is coming, and on that day there is you cannot buy a bouquet of flowers on that day, or unless you bought it in advance or booked it in advance, right? Why is there such a scarcity of products on such a day, where there is almost like a pressure on everyone to sort of buy
Oh,
bouquets
yeah.
for your spouse, significant other, whoever? No, so these, while some of these are an extended outreach of the hospitality industry, may the hallmarks of the world be blessed, but essentially these are triggers for people to tell each other. Use the word currency earlier on. These are currency elements that measure love. How do you measure love, right? Ultimately, in India we have this saying that, oh yeah, ye hamara jaan jigar hai, hamare liye jaan bhi deta hai, meaning the most valuable commodity in the world is your life, and he's they bank on you to give their life or your life to them. But that is the extreme form of love, sacrificial love, or love that puts you at. But when and in you look at any relationship, the love of a mother and a child is seen by and large as the most selfless form of love. But every other love, whether it is a dad trying to buy love from children, or expression through the expression of gifts, or during Christmas we talk about Santa Claus to children, these are all currencies that you. But ultimately this world revolves on the principle of reciprocity, give and take. Will somebody ever give me 5 years in a row gifts, in the 5 years, if I don't reciprocate back and possibly return in some shape or form some degree of gifts back, right? Otherwise I would be seen as a selfish taker versus them always giving. So in one economy, some people say you should love people and use things, but if you love things and use people, you're set up for failure.
Very, very well said. And since we are talking about emotions and economy in the same breath, economy is many times driven by this core principle or formula of demand and supply. Now that also comes into play sometimes in your emotional exchange. If you are too much available, then probably you have less value in terms of the way you would be appreciated. And so, but it just comes naturally, and you automatically find a balance. And I'll switch our focus slightly, and probably we'll come back to this track. And now we go to how political parties, while they are looking at offering a budget for the coming year, uh, takes into account the emotional quotient of people at large, as well as need to generate employment, etc. So for specifics, I'll come to you, Sunil ji. But Sanjay ji, how do you see, do you think politicians also are cognizant of the emotional response of people while they have various policies formulated or provisions in the budget are placed?
I think when we look at from political point of view, politicians they do observe the citizens' emotional reaction, but their observation of the citizens' reaction is more based on their advantage. They're not looking at to see what will actually make the society happier, better, improve them. I think what they're looking at is that what they offer, what will they have in the immediate, return. So that state of emotion has always been observed. But these states that the politicians use is for temporary purposes. It doesn't have a long-term effect. They don't look at the outcome that will have long term. They look at short term gains rather than long term improvements. And it is important for them to look at emotions, but it will always be used for their own political usage rather than the importance and the progress of society. And this is where we have to really understand that politicians will ultimately always in some form have the propaganda, and this propaganda has been used from beginning of time. It will not change. This is just part of how the politicians have been working and manipulating society. Unfortunately, we hope that we can have a Ramaraj one day, but we'll see.
So we will see, and maybe you are more skeptical than I could be, or Sunilji could be, or maybe. But there will be many people who feel that politicians are also sincere, and they are in the politics because of their emotions for the nation. Is one way to look at it. But Sunilji, let us hear from you. 40 lakh crore rupees of provision by Government of India's budget presented by Nirmala Sitaraman, Modi government looking at the budget with a far-sighted growth of India, even considering how India will be in 2047. So I think there has been a tremendous increase in the budget for defense also, and several other items. So your first take, coming from the corporate world, on how do you see this budget? Is it corporate friendly, common man friendly, and anything that you feel stuck with you?
So one of the things with this year's budget is we must realize that it's coming on after a year where the country got buffeted by COVID. So the COVID, post-COVID, two lockdowns, any society that was locked down for such a long time is bound to have some long-term implications on the economy, from supply chain disruptions, from price increases, from expectations from consumers, small businesses getting affected, so on and so forth. So there's a entire session we could do discussing budget. That's not my primary area, but just as an observer, what I'm struggling to wrap my mind around is how do you balance immediate short-term goals and manage long-term growth? It comes down to, even you and I as heads of families, we are always struggling between managing our day-to-day here and the now versus influencing for the next 5, 10 years, 15 years. Because when you invest something into the future, you're operating on a black box of assumptions. You're not necessarily sure which way the winds of change would go. But our country is a country that is banking on huge promise of a very powerful youth economy, of a very, very powerful startup economy that is burgeoning and unleashing its
Allow me to interrupt you for a second. And based on what you said, looks like you are suggesting or hinting that the immediate needs are not considered as much as the long term goals are attended to in this budget. Am I right in interpreting your words like that?
So, if you see the line items of the budget, defense, education, finance, banking, some of these nation building activities are addressed, including boosting small economies, small businessmen to kickstart spending and so on in the post COVID economy. So, I think they kind of managed to do short term as well as long term. See, in a budget thing, you can never please anybody. Just like even in your family, you only have finite resources, and you try to earmark something, and then you say for the future they'll say, oh, what about our immediate vacation? We want to go on vacation, we want to have a party now, right? So there's always a struggle to manage short term, and I think, see, particularly because this is a post COVID budget, there are bound to be a lot of negative feedbacks. But in my view, if the focus is to develop India in the next 10 years, this budget has got all the right line items in my view.
So all the right line items, and I'll mention one or two for someone who comes from education, Professor Sanjay Patel. Uh, so technologically speaking, they will auction 5G spectrum 2022. That is one side. They are also looking at building 75 digital banking units in 75 districts. But the point that I wanted to share with you is there is emphasis on regional language education, and there is also a proposal of new digital university. So new digital university is likely to be a fascinating way uh,
They're also
to
talking about a digital rupee as opposed to a physical rupee. It's going to be a fascinating experiment, considering India's already way ahead in digital payments and Bharat Pay, Phone Pay, all these online payments. I think, if you compare the banking systems of the West versus the banking systems in India, India is like 5 steps ahead of the rest of the world, because they didn't have to go through a linear growth process that the Western banks and Western Union, Western side
yeah.
of the.
Actually, there is a term circular economy. I'll come to you to explain what do you make out of circular economy. But Professor Patel, digital university, and based on your experience of last 2 years or so, well, you are sitting at home and taking online classes. Is digital education or education online, uh, how do you compare it with one-on-one teaching?
We've seen the challenges that we faced. Obviously, the pandemic has driven us to a new type of economy, education, work setting in which we become more virtual. The concept of virtuality, it almost makes us into a machine. We have observed that the IQ of students have diminished by about 15% on average, particularly young children. And we have seen also, and we've this has been published in many of the medical journals, that because the students are wearing masks if they're in the classroom, that has impacted them, because young children cannot, they learn by seeing the voices of, by seeing the lips of the teachers to learn phonics and pronunciation. The virtual classroom actually has had, a very challenging aspect of learning, because two phase. One is that we need the human touch. We're not in the classroom to receive that human touch from the professor or the teacher. There is a chemistry. There is an emotional chemistry when we're in the physical classroom, right? As we talked about. Number two, because it's virtual, a lot of students tend to go turn off the camera because everybody's very shy to turn it on, but or they could be sleeping, or they just go, they turn it off and they leave. So what are they really learning? And so it becomes very challenging for us. And for us as educators, we need to be in the classroom to go around to the students, and if they're doing small work assignments, we need to go around and help them, assist them one-on-one, or be able to take their questions and answers. But because we're in a virtual state of the classroom, we're losing that, those little minute elements which actually help develop the brain cells, the thinking, their emotional state as well. Ultimately, we have seen that because of these, New York State even had to abandon the state regents exams. And we're seeing now universities such as some Ivy League colleges have even abandoned taking the SAT to accept students. So the virtual classroom, which is a great concept, we needed it in this kind of situation. But long term, are we showing progress in human nature, human intelligence, human emotions? That is the question we have. And we've seen it's not helping the students at all.
I think that's a very, very nice, exhaustive analysis, and that doesn't speak very good about the digital universities concept, so to say. But we are almost near the concluding part of our conversation, and I'll recollect two songs or just one lines. So Sunili, there is one song which says, "Na bivi na bacha na baap bada na maiya." But the whole thing is that कि भैया सबसे बड़ा रुपया. And there is one song that says, पैसे बिना प्यार फिजूल है, रानी ये जवानी की भूल है. So the money or economics over emotions, that's what you gather from these songs. But I guess somewhere we want to think that how you make other person feel should be given its due value, because then only humanity can survive. If you only look at economics, then probably we'll run into a dry kind of a setup. So one minute for both of you, your tips on how to stay human, because I consider being emotional is a positive thing than paying attention to monetary concerns alone.
Gifts are great, but a kind gesture, a smile, a hug, a kiss, they are equally valuable. They say, right, money can't buy everything, but for the most part, whatever money can buy, I'd rather have the money.
I got you. Professor Patel, your 2 cents.
Uh, Money can buy a house, but not a home. The bottom line is that all the objects are temporary. The subjective part, which is internal, is permanent, and hopefully we want to balance the two. I mean, we're not saying we neglect the object side, but we don't want to make that the primary. We want to make sure we have the internal aspect of emotions as well.
Wonderful. So, on that very, very enlightening conversation with Professor Sanjay Patel and Sunil Robert Vipulaji, when we talk about emotions and economics in one breath, that also means that we are not going to undermine the importance of having a balanced and pragmatic approach, because just being emotional may lead to the title of being emotional fool. So we want emotionally intelligent intelligent human beings, and probably they need to pay attention to economics also. And I think Indian government has also taken care of that part by working on the infrastructure. So such a wide range we could cover. Thanks to both my panelists once again, and with lots of good wishes. Thanks to all of you for being a part of this conversation. This is Ashok Vyas. Namaste.